Okay, everyone, welcome to week 4. We're going to jump in here and talk a little bit about some important ideas for outreach, and later in the week we'll talk about missional community. But let's focus a little bit on some of the important things about outreach that are intuitive in some ways, and some ways they're just things we probably overlook at times. So if these are things that I bring up to you that seem like it's old hat to you, then that's fine. Save this for your training manuals and the way that you equip others to do ministry. But I feel pretty sure that there's going to be something that's going to land with you where you are here. So let's dive in. First of all, I want to talk about what's known as the flaw of the excluded middle. I've mentioned a couple times the book Celtic Evangelism, or The Way of Celtic Evangelism. And in that book, there's a quote from a missiologist named Paul Hebert, or Hybert. I'm not sure how to say his name, but nonetheless, an excerpt is taken from an article he wrote in a missiology journal, where he talks about the 3 levels where people live, and how we tend to focus on the bottom level and the top level, but we inadvertently exclude the middle level. So let's look at what those are so we get a picture of what he's talking about. The bottom level where people live is mostly the empirical level. It's what can be known through the senses, what we can perceive in the world around us, and what we understand through facts or simple logic. And here's a couple of simple examples. Like, if I plant seeds, it's going to lead to crops. If I'm a farmer, I just understand the simple logic of that, and I know that because I've taken it in through my senses. I've watched what happens when I plant seeds and they lead to crops. If I'm driving down the road and I turn left, it means I'm heading to one destination, and I'm not heading to one that would be to the right side of the road. That's just a conclusion that I make through simple logic or through experience or facts that I've taken in through my senses. But even something as logical and theological as Jesus died for my sins is also understood at this level. But it's in this sense, like, we can give assent to this theological idea. Sure, yeah, Jesus died for my sins. We understand it at this bottom level of life, but it can still remain a fairly simple logical proposition, and not necessarily a proposition that we engage and wrestle with and try to figure out how to live out day to day. It doesn't mean that when I say that Jesus died, let me say it this way. When I say that Jesus died for my sins as a proposition that we can understand at the bottom level of life, it doesn't mean that I don't think that it invades or belongs in every facet of life. What I'm saying is that for a lot of people, it just exists at this kind of simple, logical, empirical level of life. Okay, the top level of life is beyond what our senses can perceive. The bottom level was the empirical level that we take in through our senses. The top level is beyond what our senses can perceive. It's these more philosophical, existential questions. It might be questions related to the sacred or the transcendent. And these are things that religions, including Christianity, try to address. They tend to be things like ultimate issues in life, like what is our origin, what is our purpose, what's our destiny, why am I here? And religion really tries to zero in on these questions a lot of times, Christianity in particular, to try to give an answer for our purpose, for our destiny, to try to give an explanation for why we exist, to address us at this existential, philosophical level. And that's really important. It's important that we be able to do that, because this is a realm that honestly science and scientific reasoning can't really address. So it's important that we do have answers at this top level. However, here's what's important. The middle level are just the issues of life. It's dealing with the uncertainty of the near future, not what's going to happen when I die, but what's going to happen tomorrow, or the crises of the present. Dealing with financial strains. A parent has lost their job, or the pressure of meeting the demands of high school education, or trying to figure out what the student's going to do next. Those are crises of the present, unknowns of the past. How does what's happened in my life to this point affect me now How am I going to be able to overcome? This is all the stuff of ordinary life, but this is the key. It's the level that primarily drives most people's lives most of the time. At any given moment, it's the middle level of life where we're going to be driven. It's the middle level of life that's going to influence our day-to-day decisions. It's going to capture our thoughts. It's going to capture our imagination. And so what this means is that we can't exclude the middle in our thinking about outreach and evangelism. However, sometimes we do exclude the middle. We tend to think sometimes with regard to evangelism at the level of the ultimate issues, the origin, purpose, identity, origin, purpose, and destiny type questions. But it's the middle. I'm talking about the middle level issues that we just addressed there. How do we minister in the middle? Here's what Jacques Ellul, the famous French philosopher, said: the world no longer listens to the gospel. The Word of God no longer penetrates into the reality of human life. People seek other solutions, listen to other promises, to other gospels. Now, one of our responses to that could be, well, it's because the world is so broken, it's so corrupt. We're in a modern, postmodern world that squeezes out the gospel. It doesn't want to listen to it. And it's so corrupt and beyond even creating openings for the hope of the gospel to come in. It's we've become a post-Christian nation. Our culture has bought into the tide of secularism, and there's lots of reasons that we could use to describe a cause for this reality that Ellul is talking about here. But another way of looking at this that I think is important, and this is what Walt Mueller says, who wrote the book Engaging the Soul of Youth Culture that you're going to read later in the course. The problem is not so much that the culture is corrupt or that somehow or another society has squeezed out the gospel. Because remember, the gospel is light, and the darkness has not overcome it, which is what John chapter 1 tells us. The problem is with the messengers of the gospel. And my point here is that if the world no longer listens to the gospel, maybe we're not telling the gospel in the middle level of life. Maybe we're assuming that because it's perceived at this bottom level with simple logic, yeah, Jesus died for my sins. Okay, great. Now what? What time's lunch? Or at this upper level of life where we address things oftentimes, the existential and philosophical questions of life. Maybe the problem is that the world doesn't listen to the gospel because we're not addressing the middle. So we're going to focus on that. What's the middle level of life for adolescents today? Well, developmentally speaking, and you talked about these in a previous class with Dr. Mindy Coates Smith, the questions that are related to individuation. Who am I? Do my decisions matter? Do I have any autonomy? Do I have any power? And where do I belong? Where do I fit in? Those are the developmental questions that are a function of adolescence in the process of individuation, of becoming their own person, their own self. They're driven by these internal tasks of resolving these questions. And those are the kind of questions that drive them at the middle level of life. With regard to their longings, these are deep-seated emotional longings that adolescents have that they may or may not be able to verbalize, but they all, at some level, have this longing to be taken seriously, that for a safe place, to explore life, to experience the grandness and the adventure of life, and for a place to be uniquely who God made them to be. And again, this may not be that they're even articulating themselves in light of being made in God's image. They just long to be uniquely who they were made to be. These are middle level of life issues for adolescents. And these are the kind of things that we have to take seriously as we consider outreach and evangelism to adolescents. In the olden days of youth ministry, the idea was that if you built it, they would come. And that's what happened. This is actually a picture of a big circus tent that Jim Rayburn, the founder of Young Life, rented and set up in a fairgrounds across the street from some factories in Dallas, Texas in the early 40s, maybe around 1940. And his idea was, we'll have this big rally, and we'll get kids to come to this big deal. And it worked for a little while, but eventually we realized that wasn't the way to go about doing ministry that was going to reach all kinds of kids. And actually the reality is today that if you build it, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come. So if we're really serious about reaching kids that are the farthest out from Jesus, the ones we've referred to in previous lectures as the quadrant 4 kids, the least interested and the least familiar with Christianity, then we have to be committed not to creating attractional kind of ministries that draw them into us, but to going where they are to meet them where they are. This is called contact work ministry. Contact work ministry is essentially this: going where kids are, entering their turf, not inviting them to yours, but doing this to build a bridge of unconditional friendship for the purpose of bringing an awareness of God's love. It's going where kids are, and it's taking the time, and maybe, if we're honest, a bit of the courage to enter their turf, to go into their world where they hang out, where they live, so to speak. Not with a focus on inviting them to come to our turf, where it's comfortable for us. We go where it's uncomfortable for us because it's comfortable for them. We do that to build a bridge of unconditional friendship. And this is always with this idea in mind of bringing an awareness of God's love. I believe in previous courses you've read the book Revisiting Relational Ministry by Andrew Root. And he does give us some really important checks to keep in mind as we think about this contact work ministry. We're building unconditional friendships, not friendships with a hidden agenda to try to manipulate a kid to be part of our program. It's an unconditional friendship for the purpose of bringing an awareness of God's love. And Andrew Root says this really well. It's by being a placeholder for Jesus, by believing that Jesus is, to borrow the term from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, concretely present in our relationships. That He's present with us as we are engaging in these unconditional friendships with kids. To bring, ultimately, our concrete presence brings the awareness of God's love to them. That's contact work. What's the aim of contact work? It's winning the right to be heard. That's what we're there for. It's building a bridge of friendship and trust. It's meeting people where they are. It's showing up and listening. And it's sacrificial love. It's going to cost us something in order to enter into their turf. And it's being available to the Spirit's movement. Again, we have to always be as sensitive as we can be as ministers of the gospel to be tuned in to the movement of the Spirit and keep in step with the Spirit so that we don't get ahead of the Spirit, so that we don't inject our agenda into a moment in a relationship, but that we follow the Spirit's lead or the Spirit's movement there. What are the excuses against doing contact work ministry? Well, I don't have the time. That's not my gift. I don't relate as well at the high school as I do at the youth group meeting. Well, I'm supposed to be in my office. That's my job description. Well, let's just concentrate on making the youth group great. That'll get kids to come. Well, we get our students leaders to do that sort of outreach kind of stuff. They make the contacts with their kids because they're the ones that have the friendships with them. And you know what? There's plenty of excuses against doing contact work, but none of them really hold up to the biblical mandate for incarnational witness, incarnational evangelism. We have to be committed to going where kids are. Let's be honest about contact work ministry. The biggest barrier is usually fear. It's just scary. And being ignored is painful when you show up at a school. So is being rejected. It's really a serious commitment of time, and oftentimes it may look like there's just a little bit of results that comes with it. But ultimately, if we're honest, it's the only way to reach the farthest out disinterested kid. There's a typo in my slide. It's the only way to reach the farthest out disinterested kid if we're really honest. There's no way around that. We have to go where they are. There are 3 levels to contact work. Level 1 is being seen. And what I mean by being seen is basically we just show up. We show up regularly. We show up in places where kids are. It may be around a school community, depending on the school in your particular ministry setting or the schools where you are, and they have different levels of rules and response or expectations with regard to who can be on a school campus. But maybe if you have access, you go visit an athletic practice, or you go hang out where they're doing rehearsals for the school play. It's being around the school in places where kids are. But it could also be at the mall. It could be at a particular street corner. It could be at the convenience store across the street from the school where kids hang out afterwards. It could be at the frozen yogurt store. But it's going where they hang out in their world. You remember the words of St. Francis of Assisi. We preach Jesus Christ, and when necessary, we use words. It's really here that this level 1 of contact work is about being seen. It's just showing up and being around. And you know what? If we're honest about that, that can be kind of awkward. It can feel like we're showing up with no real purpose. We don't know why we're there. We don't know that we don't have the conviction that this is really making a difference. And it can make us feel rather uncomfortable. There have been plenty of times when I've walked into a school campus or in a situation where kids are, and I've introduced myself, and it's just shut down conversation. There have been plenty of times where I've showed up and kids have literally walked the other way. It can be a challenge. It can be really awkward. But if we experience that, it's really helpful for us to recognize that's probably what a kid would feel like if we invited them to come to something on our turf. If we invited them to show up to something that we do. Now we get a better feel for what it is that we're asking them to do when we ask them to show up to our event. When we go to contact work and when we go do contact work and make ourselves uncomfortable, even at that primary level of just showing up, we realize just how big a barrier it is for kids to come to our turf and do something that we're asking them to do. Well, that's the first level, contact work, being seen. The second level, level 2, is conversing. It's just making conversations with kids. It can be as simple as just saying hello when you walk by them. It can be equally as powerful as saying, hello, Sean. Hello, Andrea. Hello, Emmy. Because we've learned their name and we're saying it back to them as we walk past them across town or across the hallway at the practice or wherever it is that we encounter kids. But real friendships can be built through this kind of communication, and it just begins initially with conversing. And usually it begins with conversing so that we can get kids to start talking, so that we can shut up, and so that we can listen to what they have to say. So conversing isn't about us carrying the conversation. It's learning how to skillfully ask the right kind of questions that invite kids to share a little bit of themselves with us, so that maybe the next time that we encounter them, they'll share a little bit more of themselves with us, and a little bit more, so that over time a relationship of trust can be built. So that over time that kids can learn that we're showing up and we're opening up conversation because we have a genuine interest in them. We really do care about them. Well, that's level 2 contact work. Level 3 contact work is doing something together. That's earning the right to enter into an important part of their lives, whatever it is that they do. So it can be as simple as doing what you do and doing what they do. If you like to fish and they like to fish, hey, let's go fishing sometimes. If they like sports and you like sports, then hey, maybe let's go watch a football game together at your house. Maybe it's working on school homework together. You're good at math, they struggle at math. Hey, let me step in and give you a hand there. You like to go bowling? I like to go bowling. Let's get some guys together and let's go bowling. You play guitar? I play guitar. Let's get together and jam some. The whole idea is just to continue that relationship. So because in that sort of in those organic moments of being together, it's when relational bonds grow deeper. It's about shared experiences. So that in later reflection, a high school kid or even a middle school kid doesn't necessarily remember the significance of the moment. They just remember something really profound about the fact that they were together. And their internal judgment filters see you as a person that can be trusted, as a person who's genuinely interested in them. And really, to almost every kid, even, this might be a bit of a stretch, but to even the most hardened kid, there's a longing to be known. There are some kids who are so extremely hurt and who've been kind of pushed aside and cast aside into the shadows for so long that maybe they've given up altogether. But really, you'd be amazed at times when you befriend a kid, even the kid who looks the hardest or toughest, and just by earning the right to find out that they're really a tender heart who just wants to be known and loved. Doing something together solidifies those kind of relationships and reinforces that kind of trust. The key commitments to contact work: be consistent, show up regularly. If you're going to go often. You need to make a plan to show up if you're going to be committed to contact work ministry, to showing up on a regular basis. A lot of times it's good to show up at the same place, the same time each week, and multiple times a week is recommended to do that. Be consistent. Secondly, be yourself. Sometimes we feel like in order to have an impact that we've got to be a certain way. We've got to be a charismatic personality that is magnetic and draws lots of kids to ourselves. If that's not you, then you're going to fail miserably if you are disingenuous. Kids have a very sensitive, how should I say this? They've got a crap detector, and they're pretty intuitive, pretty sensitive. The needle on the crap detector is pretty sensitive, and they can recognize when you're being fake, when you're trying to be something that you're not. And pretty soon, maybe initially, you might get a little mileage with trying to be a real outgoing, super gregarious, very magnetic, kind of, hey, how's it going personality. But if it's not really you, that'll come out eventually, and you'll be exposed as being a fraud to high school kids, like a lot of other people are in their lives. So the key is to be comfortable within the bounds of who you are. And if that means that you show up, but you're pretty patient and you're quiet, and you don't throw yourself in the middle of a group of kids and try to be the one who steals attention and becomes the person in the spotlight, over time you're still going to win that. You're going to win friends. You're going to win kids over. You're going to earn their trust in doing that. So you be yourself. And then lastly, be respectful. And what I mean by that is, if you have the opportunity to show up to a school setting where kids are, then you have to be absolutely respectful for all the limitations and boundaries that the school itself places on you, or being in compliance with all the expectations that students have. So for example, a simple thing: when you show up, dress better than a kid. Be respectful. If there's a dress code at the school, be compliant with the dress code. If there are particular times or hours or even places where you can or can't be set by the administration, be respectful. Don't ever be a problem for administrations at schools. It's never going to help you try to fight for your right to do anything, to be present on a campus, to have access to certain places. You're going to do more damage than good by trying to push against the boundaries that are set there. And if you have zero access to a school, which is not uncommon, there are plenty of school administrators that just say, look, I can't manage all the people who want want to come onto the campus. And my first priority is to protect kids here. And in this day and age, that's a pretty important priority, and you know that. And so if they draw the boundary line where they say, you know what, I just can't let anybody on the campus, then we go, okay, we're respectful of that. That's probably the majority of our campuses anyway. It doesn't mean that we can't do effective outreach ministry if we don't have access to the school. It just means that we have to be creative and do that in different ways. But the point here really is that you have to be respectful for those boundaries that are put in place for us. Okay, a summary of ministering in the middle. Outreach ministry has to take into account the middle level of kids. If we're really serious about reaching those quadrant 4 kids, the ones that we said are the farthest out, the farthest away from Jesus, we have to be willing to enter their turf and not expect them to show up to our event. Contact work ministry is about listening, but it's about listening to kids as we earn the trust to hear their story, the middle level of their life. It's also about listening to the Holy Spirit as He leads in His work of drawing them to Jesus. And then lastly, you're going to apply these principles in week 5. Coming up in week 5, one of your assignments is going to be to meet a kid that you don't already know, a brand new kid, in their turf, in their world, and you're going to interview them. Now, the details of that assignment are going to be in week 5. But I just want to give you a heads up. I want you to be as aware as you can be of the challenge of meeting kids in the middle level, thinking about middle level issues of kids' lives. And I want you to think about your commitment to contact work ministry, because it's going to take some contact work ministry for you to meet a kid that you don't currently know in order to interview them for the purposes of this class. So it's coming, some practical application for these ideas of ministering in the middle and doing outreach ministry.